More than 70 years ago, at the height of World War II, Vice President Henry Wallace warned of a time when people he called American fascists would take over our democracy and turn it into another arm of their corporate empire. Was he predicting the Trump administration? Let's ask tonight's politics panel. With me for tonight's politics panel are Angela Morabito, Senior Campaign Organizer for StandUnited.org, and Sarah Badawi, Attorney and Legislative Affairs Director for the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. Great to have you both with us, back with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So to start out with, Scott Pruitt is turning the EPA into a propaganda arm for the fossil fuel industry. He's already staffed the agency with climate change deniers, and now he's started repeating big oil's lies live on television. Earlier today, for example, he told CNBC that he doesn't believe that carbon dioxide causes climate change.
Human activity on the climate is something very challenging to do, and there's tremendous disagreement about the degree of impact. So no, I would not agree that it's a primary contributor to the global warming that we see.
This is exactly what Henry Wallace was talking about in 1944 when he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times about American fascists. He described these people, these American fascists, as people who are spokesmen for monopoly and vested interest, whose final objective, toward which all their deceit is directed, is to capture political power, so that, using the power of the state and the power of the market simultaneously, they may keep the common man in eternal subjection. Isn't that exactly what we're seeing here? This is a state that has been captured by the fossil fuel industry to the point that we have the highest official at the EPA willing to go on national television and lie. He knows it's a lie. Everybody knows it's a lie. Everybody's trying to pretend, oh, maybe it's not a lie. This is just astonishing to me. Angela?
Well, the important thing here is that the EPA is already not doing its job very well. That doesn't make it okay for someone to go on television and say things that aren't true. But if he believes that's the case, he knows way more about fossil fuels than me. And he's an expert. He was chosen by President Trump because he is an expert. The problem with the EPA...
He's not an expert on climate change. He was the Attorney General of Oklahoma.
He's an expert on fossil fuel and the law.
Yeah, okay, I'll give you that.
Or put another way, he's a mouthpiece for fossil fuel. Scott Pruitt is somebody who built his career undermining the EPA and everything it stands for in the interest of helping big oil and gas turn a higher profit. And I think he's been placed in this position specifically to enable these corporations to continue making those large profits, to Tom's point
This is the guy who copied and pasted a letter from Devon Energy onto Oklahoma Attorney General stationery and submitted it to the EPA.
Yeah, that was a bad move. He absolutely should not have done that. But the change that needs to happen at the EPA is, no more of these man-made disasters. You think about the EPA trying to blow up a gold mine in Colorado, and they completely trashed a river and put mercury and, metal waste and all kinds of things in that water that doesn't need to be there. And it went to, 3 or more different states.
Yeah,
they're doing things like that. They
right.
did the same thing in Georgia, and it's like, this was an unforced error. The EPA didn't have to do that.
I know,
it certainly should not have done that. So having a manager in charge of the EPA could make things better, because at least maybe we won't have those disasters anymore.
Well, if a wealthy capitalist hadn't run a gold mine dirty and then bankrupted himself so he didn't have to pay to clean it up, then the EPA wouldn't have felt the need to come in and clean it up on his behalf. Now, they did hire, again, a private contractor, the process that Reagan started under Ann Gorsuch, Neil Gorsuch's mother, when she tried to privatize the EPA and destroy its functions, and after 3 years left amid scandal. But that private contractor didn't do a particularly good job. Another reason why we shouldn't be privatizing government.
Well, the EPA is in charge of who they hire. They made a very bad call on that contractor, and the evidence is in the water in that river.
Yes, I don't disagree. And they shouldn't have had to do it in the first place. This is an example. I mean, we got all these chemical companies, these mining companies that just dump they make all their money, and then they declare bankruptcy on the company, and all the shareholders and all the executives run to their Swiss bank accounts. There's something wrong with this, and somebody's got to clean it up. I mean, the EPA. Who else is going to clean it up?
Right. Well, it should be on the company to do, but obviously they're not.
Company doesn't exist.
Right. They're not practicing corporate social responsibility. They're not practicing any kind of responsibility. That's a problem, and that's a government reform problem. That's another thing that Pruitt should be tackling at the EPA. If you want to make private business more responsible, you have to give them the incentive to do that. Right now, the incentive is exactly what you described. It's bankrupt the company, run away, leave the EPA to clean it up, and oh, by the way, when the EPA messes up, it's not your problem anymore. That's wrong.
But wasn't this the Superfund? Isn't what she's describing the old Superfund where companies had to pay every year for all their pollution?
Well, I actually think what Angela's arguing for is for better enforcement of the regulations that the EPA should promulgate. And Scott Pruitt has built his career undermining those very regulations as Attorney General of Oklahoma, helping his clients in big oil and gas get around them or undermine them for the sake of their corporate interests. And let's be clear about something. Nobody who voted for Trump voted for their children to be poisoned by bad water. Nobody voted for them to get asthma because of polluted air. And I think what we're seeing now with Scott Pruitt and the people he's staffing the EPA with are people wholly committed to rolling back these regulations, and it's a danger for all of us, Trump supporters alike and not.
Yeah. We'll see where this goes. I don't think most Americans, as you said, want both of you.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's
don't want
no
dirty
party
air.
that wants that.
Except for the fossil fuel barons, right? Who owns Scott Pruitt?
They are the ones who benefit by denying
Scott
climate
Pruitt
change.
has done nothing to help people get around EPA regulations in his job thus far.
I would say the 20 lawsuits he brought against the EPA would say otherwise.
That's not about helping people get around regulations. That's about making the EPA do its job, and sometimes it's enforcing things incorrectly. Sometimes regulations aren't correct. His job is to manage which ones are there and which ones are solid and what ought to be enforced and what ought to be rolled back.
Okay. The latest report from the American Society of Civil Engineers is out, and it gives U.S. infrastructure a grade of D+, which is just plain unacceptable for the richest country in the history of the world. The report also says that we'll need a whopping $4.5 trillion of investment by 2025 if we want to get our roads, bridges, airports, and everything else in our infrastructure up to international standards. $4.5 trillion is less than what we spent on Bush's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and infrastructure actually has an actual, measurable, positive effect on the domestic economy. It's stimulative. So why is Trump diddling around with his $1 trillion privatization plan, and why does he want to take 83% of it and have it be private investment that is paid for by toll roads all over the United States? This sounds crazy. Sarah?
It's absolutely crazy. To take a look at our infrastructure and decide that the people who should drive it are the private sector is the entirely wrong approach. What this needs to be about is direct public investment that puts millions of people to work and takes a hard look at how we bring our infrastructure not only up to date in the traditional sense, but also looking ahead for a 21st century infrastructure investment that prioritizes clean energy and also tech. Broadband investment, helping rural communities, and also a focus on local communities with sustainability and racial equity in those jobs that we're creating.
Angela, for every dollar we spent on the Eisenhower interstate highway system in the 1950s, by the end of the 1970s, we were seeing $100 or more in additional tax revenue. Some estimates now are it's over $1,000. This is, having the government provide these things is a good public investment. Why would we want to put up toll roads and let billionaires make that money?
Infrastructure is a very worthy and worthwhile investment. $1 trillion is not a small amount of money. You might not think it's enough, but I don't know where we're going to get $1 trillion. So I will be very excited about Trump's plan to invest in this and, rebuild America and American infrastructure when I know where that trillion is coming from. We're about to hit the $20 trillion debt mark. That's a problem.
How did we pay to put a man on the moon? How did we build the interstate highway system in the first place?
We spent a lot of money, and that
we had a top tax rate of 91% on billionaires. That's how we did it. It's really easy. Roll back Reagan's tax cuts, and you can turn America back into that 1950s, 60s, and 70s paradise that Donald Trump keeps saying he's going to make America back into.
Well, I don't think that
during
the 50s,
all three
60s,
decades,
and 70s were
the top
paradise.
tax rate was 91%.
We're in a different world today, and if you put that top tax rate there, every single
still planet Earth.
It's a different world. If you make that tax rate that way today, you are going to see what is happening in certain parts of the West Coast where the billionaires pick up and leave. They go to Florida, they go to Connecticut, they go go to places where the state tax. I don't feel bad for them,
if they leave
but
the
I would
United
like
States,
to keep using
there is
their
no
tax
doubt in my
dollars.
mind that there is no shortage of people who will come along and say, well, I'll be the next billionaire. If that guy, he's not happy with $80 billion, I'll do it for $1 billion. Come on. States have raised taxes and people. If people
I
leave,
don't know what makes a billionaire.
riddance.
I don't know what specifically about a billionaire makes that person more responsible for roads than the rest of us. Democrats like to talk about people paying their fair share.
They're consuming
Roads
more
are
of
for
our
everyone.
resources.
What are billionaires taking?
They're consuming more of our resources. They're using the court system more heavily because they're to do business. They're using the banking system more heavily. They're using the legal system more heavily, and presumably their businesses are using all of the infrastructure. I mean, Apple has to deliver their iPhones to you.
Should they be paying 90%? I don't think so.
Well, how about 74%?
I think that is still a huge tax
LBJ,
rate.
Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon. I mean,
I think that's a huge tax rate.
Okay, well. All right, just real quickly, we just have a minute and a half left. Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly is expressing concern for this program to separate mothers from their children at the southern border. This seems brutal to me. Your thoughts, Angela?
I got to be honest with you, this seems incredibly cruel and not a good use of anyone's time or effort. I understand that deterrence is important, and already with Trump's election, the southern states have reported a 40% drop in illegal border crossings. I don't think that cruelty to children is the way to do it, because that child who's being brought across the border, it wasn't that child's decision. That child doesn't know so much about what's going on around and why that border crossing is happening. It's still wrong, but to put that on a child is, two wrongs don't make a right. The bigger deterrent is defunding sanctuary cities, and that's what Stand United petitioners are asking for. We have 20,000 people petitioning for a federal defunding of those cities.
Sarah?
These people are fleeing dangerous, harsh situations in their homelands. To rip them apart at the border is not only unconscionable, it's un-American.
Yeah. Well, there seems to be a consensus about that, other than the sanctuary cities
That
part.
we disagree on.
All right, we'll disagree.
But which it really is just cities wanting to be able to have local police forces that people are not afraid to call. I mean, that seems like a good idea. But in any case, Angela, Sarah, thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
And now the big picture fact of the day: holding on.